So welcome to the Thomas and Collier book study on November 5th, focusing on chapters 5 and chapter 6. Today's agenda includes our usual welcome and overview, as well as reflection and discussion on modules 7 and 8, which are chapter 5, program effectiveness, and chapter 6, enrichment programs and policy implications. Today, once again, you have me, Ivana Manthor-Anderson, with ESL Title III here at NCDPI, and also my colleague in World Languages, Dr. Anne Marie Gunter. Once we have gone through our reflections and discussions, we will have our wrap-ups and discuss next steps. You should be pretty familiar by now with how these things work on GoToMeeting and GoToWebinar with your audio controls. We know from time to time people do have trouble with their audio. Feel free to unplug your microphones, plug them back in, even log off and start over if need be. We always want to remind you to raise your hand, but also to type in the question box when you have something that you would like to share. It helps us if you type in the question box as well as get unmuted. That way we have a record of what you have shared with us. We are getting close to the end, winding down with only one more session on November 12th after today. So as we move into chapter 5, program effectiveness, I really was sad not to be able to join you for the last broadcast. And so I've had the opportunity to listen to the archive, and also for those of you who are in the 2 CEU course, I've had the opportunity to read your reflection question responses. And that's always very helpful for us as we go through and hear what you're processing and what you're thinking. And there were a couple of themes that came out in that I just wanted to mention before we jump into chapter 5. One of the themes that we saw was that some of you have seen that teachers do not feel prepared for working with their ELs, and often they may feel overwhelmed, the students as well as the teachers. And we really appreciated the back and forth that you had sharing with each other similar experiences, but also discussing ways that you have been able to help each other in that kind of situation. So one example, if Rachel is on the line, Rachel Hall shared about her ESL minute. So if she is on today, I'd love to put her on the spot and see if she'd be willing to share. I am scrolling down to check. Rachel, you are there. I'm going to unmute you. Oh, she's typed in the question box. So, Rachel, you're unmuted.
So I send out a monthly ESL minute to the staff.
She's talking, but I don't hear her. We may be having trouble on our end again.
Can you hear me now?
Let me try something. Try again, Rachel.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, they can hear. It's probably because I'm broadcasting and I'm muted.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, hopefully you guys can hear me. We are going to have to do a workaround again. Are you able to hear me? If you could raise your hand. Great, I see some hands going on. All right, Rachel, please try again.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, it seems to be working now.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I send out a monthly ESL minute by email to basically my coworkers, staff at the high school where I work, but then I've also sent it out to the rest of the district, to the rest of the county, and basically just with tips or ideas for classroom teachers to implement strategies to help their ESL students. Sometimes they're kind of research-based, and sometimes they're just simply an activity that can be tweaked to help ESL students in particular. And that has worked pretty well so far, because it's just a little bit at one time that a teacher can maybe immediately go ahead and implement in their classroom to help the English language learners. And oftentimes these strategies or activities help all the students, because even if a student is EC and maybe has trouble with like reading comprehension, well, that would help an ESL student as well as a special needs student or just any student in class.
Thank you. And if you want to put some of those links in the chat box, then everyone would have the opportunity to see that, because we know that those of you who are in the one CEU course don't respond to those questions, and so you would not have seen the resources that Rachel shared. I'm going to mute you, Rachel. I also wanted to share another theme that we saw from several of you was that you've joined the book study looking for specific strategies to help English learners. And so we wanted to reflect back on the course learning objectives, which are focused on the historical context for educating English learners in our school systems, as well as reflecting on the effectiveness of the services that are provided for ELs and looking at the implementation of services for ELs under the Every Student Succeeds Act. So the book study is not designed to drill down into actual activities or specific strategies for using in the classroom. It's focused more on looking at where we've been, where we're going, and how the research impacts and helps guide us in our decisions. So again, I see this as a great opportunity, and I saw this in the responses for you amongst each other to give suggestions and share with each other many of the things that you're actually doing within your educational setting. So thank you for how you're supporting each other. And with that, if we don't have anything else in the question box, we'll go on and jump into Chapter 5, looking at program effectiveness. So we do have a poll question. What are the characteristics of effective EL programs? Looking at long-term programming, instruction through first and second language, sociocultural support, interactive cognitively challenging discovery learning, and integration with the mainstream, and you may check all that apply. You guys are getting really good at this voting. We're at 78% who have voted. We'll give it about 10 more seconds. All right, let's close the voting and show the results. So we have 100% of you who say that sociocultural support and interactive cognitively challenging discovery learning are part of effective programming, and you are absolutely right. All of the answers here actually are part of what Thomas and Collier share with us are important for effective programming. Looking at the long term, if you've read Chapter 5 and you've seen the graph, my favorite graph that we'll be talking about in just a little while, you know how important the long-term programming is to the results. That often what we see in kindergarten through third grade does not actually play out in the long term. Looking at instruction through first and second language, building on what a student already has and adding on to that rather than taking something away, as well as that integration with the mainstream, not keeping students separate and segregated. So fantastic job on identifying the things that are important and realizing and maybe even reflecting back on the chapter and looking at how each of those pieces plays into our effective programming for English learners. All right, so in the connections, some of you may have found this very familiar, looking at the LIEP, the Language Instruction Educational Program Types. And some of you may have never seen this before. So I'm really hoping that you'll be open to asking questions about this LIEP if you want to know more about how it came to be or how it's being used. But realizing that in North Carolina, there are a number of approved program models for English learner education. And you see those listed on the screen and also in the document that was shared. So when we look at using both languages, as Thomas and Collier suggested, we have several different options with developmental, full and partial immersion, two-way, and heritage language. We also have ESL, content-based ESL, sheltered instruction, newcomer programs, and ESL co-teaching. So before we go on to the next slide to actually ask the questions, I want to know if there are any questions about any of these programming types that we have here in North Carolina. Remember, you can always type in the question box and also be unmuted to share specifically with us. We'd love to hear your voice. And so I do see that Rachel has been able to share in the question box. We'll need to share that out through the chat in order for others to see that. All right, I see a question. How does heritage language work in a school setting?
So heritage language courses, levels 1 and 2, are actually designed to be part of the high school credit sequence. So they can be offered as regular high school courses in a language. They just happen to be targeted to native speakers of a language or heritage language speakers, which could include students who are native speakers of, let's say, Spanish, if it's Spanish Heritage 1 and 2. It could also be students who've come through a dual language immersion program, or other students who have Spanish proficiency already as part of their background, and so don't need to start in, for example, a level 1 course like their native English speaking peers are doing. So the heritage language courses are, like, as I said, 2-course sequence. Heritage level 1 is in fact equivalent to a level 1 and 2 in a modern language program or traditional language program for native English speakers. Heritage language 2 is equivalent to a level 3 course. And so students take Heritage 1 and Heritage 2, they can then go on into a level 4 course with native English speaking peers. Also note that heritage language courses are always very focused on literacy skills. They certainly involve other skills, but they're very focused on reading and writing, because oftentimes when we have a native speaker of a language or a student coming from a DLI program in that language, we have a situation where we want to make sure their literacy skills are where they were going to need to be ultimately for more advanced courses, particularly for things like advanced placement courses that they will encounter later and can earn college credit. And that's why there's such a focus on those reading and writing skills. And if you look in our state standards for world languages, you'll see that the proficiency outcomes are designed that way and designed to look very closely at those literacy skills, but also support the continued development of speaking and listening skills. I do see a couple comments too that there are some places that still call these heritage language courses Spanish for native speakers 1 and 2. So you're certainly able to do that locally. We want to make sure that in our state standards and also in our state course codes that everyone uses, that we use very inclusive terminology. And that's why we changed from what used to be called native speakers courses to heritage courses, so that we have a more, I would say, positive connotation to that. We also call them heritage language, and then we have them available in many languages. So it's not just Spanish heritage courses or Spanish for native speakers courses. You can actually do heritage language courses in any modern language. That is very important for a state like North Carolina that's so linguistically diverse. We often see, of course, Spanish for heritage language courses, but we also see French, Chinese, and other languages as part of that, whether that's part of just serving the community of heritage language speakers in the area, or part of the ongoing work with dual language immersion programs into the secondary continuation.
I see we have a fan of the GLE, or the Global Languages endorsement, saying that the heritage language courses can help the students achieve that seal of biliteracy, and absolutely that can be part of the trajectory to reaching that seal. And this question, has anyone taken the time to show this on a map by district? I'm not sure what this is, so if you don't mind just following up on that question, If you're asking what districts actually offer the heritage language courses, perhaps that's what that question means. So we'll give you a second to type in the chat box or in the question box. And Anne-Marie, thank you so much for sharing that information. Yes, so heritage language courses. Do we have a map that shows who offers those?
We do not at this time, but that's a fabulous idea. We do have a document we release every year called World Languages in North Carolina, and it documents which languages, in fact, are being offered in a Heritage Language 1 and 2 format. And we do have data that shows us which districts are offering those courses each year. So we could create a map from that, and that is a great idea and one that I will share with actually the DPI sponsorship recipients who have a component of what they're doing that focuses on dual and heritage languages like this, as well as our global languages endorsement, our state seal of biliteracy, because that might be something that they could include in their sequencing or their infographics that they're creating for us.
Great idea. Great idea. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide, because the next question we have is who is supposed to write and use the LIEP? So on the next slide, you see that the LIEP includes the context of the district or charter, the criteria that they've chosen to use in order to place their students in different levels of services, and then what menu of service they're going to offer. And we always like to explain how important the context is, because what a Charlotte-Mecklenburg can offer versus what a small charter could offer could be quite different. So therefore, your menu of services would differ greatly. If an entity, either an LEA or a charter, is a recipient of Title III funds, we call that a Title III subgrantee, then the LIEP chart is completed as part of the CCIP consolidated plan, and that's usually turned in around October. So if your entity receives Title III funds, it's turned in as part of that plan and approved through that process. If an entity, mostly charters, but a few of our LEAs who do not receive Title III funds, then anyone who has at least one identified EL per the October 1 head count is required to turn in an LIEP plan. And this year for the charters, we're very excited because you're able to turn that plan in, and now I won't be able to think of the name. It starts with an E. Turn the plan in through the system that the charters were using for other things. Epicenter. Epicenter is the name. So we're very excited with that, and that just came out November 1st for our charters. And then for the few LEAs that we have that are non-recipients, we will contact them and work with them as well. So who's supposed to use it? It's not just for compliance. So although you turn it into the state for review, the real idea is this is a document that helps you plan ahead. So districts hopefully are sharing this with their schools. Hopefully their schools are even helping them make this plan, because when you look at your criteria and your menu of services, you're determining if a student is a particular proficiency level, if they've been in the United States for a particular amount of time, that these are the kinds of services you would offer. And then those services should correlate with your professional learning as well. So hopefully the LIEP, although often created at the district level, is then used by the schools in order to determine how to place their students. So I'm going to throw that question back to you guys and ask you, what types of EL programs do you have? How are you reflecting them in the LIEP? And are they effective and sustainable? So we'll give you a minute to write, and then we can unmute you. I'm not good with wait time. So we can go back, actually, if you want, to the previous slide. Oops, went backwards. And look at, maybe we can go back, and look at what we have listed as the approved types. So we know that many of you around the state use sheltered instruction, which is also called SIOP, as well as working within co-teaching with your content teachers. Let's see what Catherine said. Catherine, I'm going to unmute you, I hope. It says you're self-muted, Catherine.
Okay, can you hear me?
Perfect. Yes, thank you. Please share.
Our LIP offers 3 different models of ESL support services: comprehensive, supportive, and transitional, based on high needs to low needs, respectively. The high needs comprehensive might include pull-out for students like newcomers who have just recently arrived, and transitional, the lower needs is a student who may be transitioning out of ESL services. These are all based on EOG and end of course tests, classwork, and access scores. And the different models look like I said, either pull out or maybe push in or co-teach with the classroom teacher. And then for the transitionals, maybe just supporting teachers who are trained in ESL.
So it sounds like you're very familiar with that plan. Are you one of the people that helps to write that?
No, I'm not, but we rely on it heavily in our district in assigning services. And to the best of my knowledge, it's our ESL director who probably writes it and submits it to the state, as you said, maybe for approval.
Right. So thank you. So that's great that you're actually using that so that there's a consistency across the district in knowing how to place your students in services.
We also have a comment from Stephanie, although she doesn't have a microphone. So she says her school has an ESL pullout program, and they also have a SIOP committee that is available for any questions, and they offer tips to the teachers.
Very nice. Thank you for sharing that. Let's see, lots of comments coming in. Carlos, let's see if you'd like to be unmuted. Okay, Carlos?
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
Well, in my county, we have an ESL pullout, and that is mainly for elementary and for middle school, and then the ESL content base for the high school. That's mostly what we have in the whole county. However, I remember I used to be the ESL lead teacher many years ago, and when we started doing this plan, we included some co-teaching. And I know that one school, I don't remember now, I think it was, yes, it was a middle school, an elementary, K through 8, was really involved in with the SIOP model, and they were training, and some trainers would come to the school, and so the whole school was in tune with SIOP. I don't know if they're doing it still, but that's pretty much what we've got.
And that really ties into that second question is, are the programs effective and sustainable? Because we know that the SIOP model has research behind it. We know that it can be very impactful for our students, but if it's not sustained, when there's staff turnover, if you have a one-shot training, but then you don't have follow-up training, then would it really be sustainable? And so that's a great question as well. Thank you, Carlos.
All right.
I see that Stephanie, is this the same Stephanie without the microphone, said that she does not feel that having just the pull-out program is as effective as it should be. And oh, how I wish you had a microphone, because I'd really like to hear some more thoughts on that. So if there's anyone else that would like to talk about that, we know what Thomas and Collier say in the book, but we also wonder, what are you seeing when you are in the field? What effectiveness is there for the pull-out? Can it be effective? Let's see if Giovanna wants to add anything to that. Giovanna?
Yes.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, we do the ESL pullout in most of the elementary schools, but the difference is not like in the past when I first came in 2000 here to the United States, that we used to teach, the book, the window, the paper. Now we have to do the content also, like to follow the WIDA standards. So we also do the pull-out, but we are teaching the content to the student, the vocabulary of science and math and all those things, because we really want the students to be successful in the other classrooms. We have done a SIOP training since, we did it 3 days when a team went from each school, and now we are doing it again. They are training teachers in the schools, and the train system we are using They have to go back and train the teachers every year, the same team. They get a refresh and train everybody. I can say that we are not doing PSYOP like 100%, you know, but we are getting the word out, and we have been to the school and been seeing the teachers using some strategy that the PSYOP program tell us to use to benefit all the students.
So again, very important. You're benefiting all students, not just ELs, and that refresher is so important. Thank you.
Joanna's on the line today, but doesn't have a microphone. So she said that they have just only ESL pullout, and that their Ls tend to be pulled from one of their courses to work with an ESL instructor. She doesn't know how often or how long the instructor meets with the students, and she feels that the newcomers need much more support than they are currently getting in that model.
Okay, I'm going to do two more real quickly. Just to follow up from Stephanie, she said, even though our teachers are amazing, I just feel that our district would greatly benefit from a DLI program. And along those same lines, I'm going to unmute Helen because she's talking about having those programs in her district. Helen?
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, we have a number of programs in my district for newcomers. We have content-based ESL. We have dual language. But something that I'd like to share is a change that happened in my district a few years ago, about 3 years ago, and I guess it was a response to the ESSA requirements. My district adopted across the board for all the EL pullout groups the 3Ls framework by Marianne Kuchara and Lily Wong Fillmore, which is a framework that emphasizes content instruction, but developing literacy skills and language along with the learning. So what we are doing is giving everybody, even newcomers, grade level text, and using the strategies that this framework promotes to facilitate the acquisition of more academic language. And what we notice is that for long-term ELs, it works beautifully because that's what they needed, you know, just that boost to be able to finally reach, you know, the proficiency required to exit the program. For newcomers, we think we still need additional support, but I think it was a great decision to adopt this framework because most of the ELs were not getting the grade level instruction that they needed.
Thank you. And one of our participants asked you to please repeat 3Ls. Was that the name of it?
It's the 3Ls framework by Marianne Kuchara, that's Cuchiara, and Lily Wong Fillmore. So if you Google, you can get lots of resources about that and information about that framework.
Great, thank you so much. So we have so much to talk about today with 2 chapters that I'm going to move on. But the question about program effectiveness and sustainability, I believe I heard a theme that we all see things that are working, but we all see ways that we might be able to improve. So the graph that I got so excited about earlier, you saw in chapter 5 on page 55. This graph has been shown all over the world at this point, based on the research by Drs. Thomas and Collier. And when you look at this graph, you'll see a number of different things, and I've seen it interpreted in many, many ways. But if you look at the black line, you're looking at ESL programs, and sometimes people will even hide the rest of the graph, and you can see how almost every program seems to have similar results. But as you move on, that black line tends to drop, while the green lines, which are one-way and two-way dual language immersion, continue to grow, and as you know from your reading, have been shown to be one of, if not the only way, to truly close that gap. So I'm wondering for you, what does the graph tell you about EL education, and how can you use it in your work? So again, please go ahead and type at least part of what you want to say so that we have that record as we're doing the grading and also for our archive. And then once you've typed some of that, we'll be able to identify you and unmute you. All right, I'll unmute Catherine. You're self-muted, Catherine. Catherine? There we go.
I'm sorry, I'm trying. Okay. Yes, I just realized the same thing kind of in my own teaching over the past, this is my 3rd year as an ESL teacher. I taught French for many, many years, but that I wasn't really getting anywhere with just a straight kind of English only immersion like I had done in my French classes. So I realized that I had to do some biliteracy in all of my ESL instruction. We do have a dual language immersion school, and we also have a school that focuses formally on biliteracy. I'm not at one of those schools, but I realized that in my own instruction, I had to take the decisive role that I was going to use biliteracy in my teaching.
Thank you for sharing. Let's hear from Cyrilda. I'm slowly navigating. Here we go. Cyrilda? It says you're self-muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I just want to just reiterate that we all need to push for dual language, because a lot of times I know the admin where I am, the staff above us, they're thinking that they're doing the right thing by pushing the English only, and it really isn't. It's not helping.
So thank you. Yes, keep that push going. I see a very interesting comment by Emily Golightly. Let me get Emily unmuted. Emily? We're playing musical microphones. It says self-muted. Then it says cannot take control. There we go.
Hello?
Yes.
Hey, sorry, I'm in the car. We're traveling to Carolina TESOL right now, so I'm trying to multitask.
Awesome. That's great. Well, tell us about your comment about more money.
Well, I really would love to see us have the dual immersion program. I see the benefit, I see the graph, and I highlighted that and put big stars around it in my book because I think it's compelling, and I think if administrators saw this, it's compelling to them too. But where's that money going to come from for us to do that? So in looking at the book, I liked that they talked about, having 2 teachers partner together and, having double the impact with 2 classes, but you still need fully bilingual teachers that are willing to go into that position. And would that take a position away from our ESL teachers? I don't know. I mean, it's just a lot logistically to think about, but I believe in it and I think we need it.
And those financing questions are always big in everyone's mind, whether you're an administrator or a teacher or whoever. What we find, though, and what our research and implementation shows, that DLI programs are no more expensive than any traditional program. What a lot of our DLI programs decide to do is sort of constructively structure their teaching force. And so, for example, when you introduce a DLI program to a school, you obviously start with one grade level, one cohort. It's usually kindergarten at an elementary school. And what they're able to do is say, okay, we have the same number of teaching positions, but now we just need to fill an open teaching position with a kindergarten teacher who can, in fact, teach our standard course of study in a language other than English. And so they do that different ways. Many times we see our schools decide to move teachers around. So no teaching positions are lost and no one loses their job. But in fact, when you have someone retire or transition out of that school or out of that district, that creates an open position. And then you can reassign that open position to where you need to hire a teacher for the DLI program, but you stay with the same number of teaching positions. So financially speaking, doing DLI is no more expensive than doing a traditional program. No one loses their jobs. And in the long run, you get what one of our DLI principals is so fond of saying, the 2-for-1 deal, because you get 2 languages that students are learning. You get that additive bilingualism, but really for the price of 1, as if it were still a monolingual program. So that's something to consider, especially when we think about showing this graph to administrators and talking to them about the effectiveness of different programs for our English learners.
Thank you for those comments. We have a couple of comments about budgets. We have several comments about how important it is they see to have that longevity with the schools going into middle school and high school. This is a very interesting comment that the graph is frustrating because the person is not bilingual. So Melissa, I'm going to unmute you if you'd like to expand on that just a little bit. Hi. Can you hear me, Melissa? Melissa? You're unmuted. Can you hear me? Okay, let me mute Melissa back.
So Melissa's comment was that she's frustrated because she's not bilingual and she feels like she's maybe not serving her students well because of this. I can assure you that good pedagogy and a committed teacher always serve students well. When we think about the language we use, we need to consider the plan we have, the different strategies we're using to make that language available to students. And the other thing I would share with everyone, as we know, language learning is a lifelong journey. And if you feel like being bilingual would be something you want to do, then you can always learn another language. We've had people say, you know, that they've heard about that old age hypothesis that the best time to learn a language is when you're still a minor. And that's not true. Anyone can learn a language at any age. And in fact, there's some recent research that shows that as we age, being bilingual or becoming bilingual is actually an advantage to us in delaying signs of dementia and other aging types of issues.
So thank you for sharing that, Anne-Marie. I'm going to unmute Christina. I would love to hear a little more from her about how she's already taking what she's learning through this book study and implementing that. Christina?
Yeah, I had a conversation with my admin this week because they're in a position now where they're looking forward. They are on the cusp of becoming a Title I, and they have a larger EL population now. So they're looking forward to hiring another EL teacher. And I know that there's a candidate that has bilingual education masters, and she's fluent in Spanish and English. And so I was just having a conversation with them based on the book and the research, and just saying, you know, this might be a direction you guys want to go in, because the research supports that, you know, you guys can do that and expect bigger gains. So she was really receptive, and it was just helpful to have the research behind me in bringing it to their attention. So they're looking at different ways they can mold the program for the future.
Okay. I'll tell you, the hardest challenge is trying to read what you guys are writing and listen at the same time, because we know we're not going to get to unmute everybody every time, and we want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to speak at least once. Thank you, Christina, for sharing that and for being so proactive with the information that you're learning in the book study. I think I'm going to unmute Ingrid. And of course, Anne-Marie is reading as well and catches things I might have missed, but not Anne-Marie, Ingrid, let's hear from you about what you see in this graph. Can you hear me, Ingrid? Are you there, Ingrid? Her audio is off. Okay, so what Ingrid has written is the graph really validates the power of bilingual education, and the findings from the study really can be applicable everywhere. It also helps us to see how dual language education can close the achievement gap. I do see a question. So I'm going to read the question, and this might be something for thought. I don't know if we want to go into answering at this point, but people can certainly type some of their responses. The question is, what do you do if no staff knows the student's first language? Then it says, but we do have staff who can speak Spanish. Do we still offer instruction in Spanish, but not in the other L1? That's a very philosophical question that is often discussed. Anne-Marie, do you want to address that at all?
Well, I think one of the important things to think about for an answer to this is North Carolina is a local control state. So what you decide to do for a question like this in any given school or district depends on the local resources you have and what you think is best for your community and for your students that you're serving. And so there are going to be a lot of different answers to that question.
And so one person has already responded to that, talking about using technology to promote resources in the lesser known language. Some other people have ordered books that are translated or written in some of those other languages that the teacher may not speak. So we can pull together some of the responses from this transcript, since I know everyone does not get to see everything that comes in the question box. Well, thank you. I think we're going to move on because I think we could spend the whole day just on this one chapter with a lot of exciting information. So we do have a few more questions about Chapter 5. How are you evaluating your school and district services, your types of programs, your impact, and the needs? And so some of you have addressed this already, so we won't linger here very long. But what are you actually doing to evaluate? And once you have evaluated, how are you moving to the next steps? And again, you don't have to type your complete answer in the question box, but if you start typing something, give us the main idea, and then we will know who to unmute. So I see one that says we have an end of the year data discussion, looking at access scores and setting goals for the upcoming year. Catherine, do you want to expand on that?
Each year after we get our access scores, our director calls each of us from our schools to meet together and review those scores with our team, look at areas where we've grown and areas where we need to focus on more growth for the upcoming year. And then we build our programming off of that very helpful discussion.
Did the changes in accountability under ESSA impact those discussions any differently this past year as we had our first round of data under ESSA?
I would say a big yes, and the data discussion was incorporated the year before, but it was not mandatory. And then the second year that we did it, it was mandatory for all ESL teachers.
And do you think, I know I'm putting you on the spot, it's okay if you don't know, do you think that having ELs included in the ESSA accountability in a different way has caused educators to take more notice to working with their English learners in the content area classes?
Absolutely. I think that it's helped the ELs themselves to feel more included, and having classroom teachers take more of the role as language teachers for all of our students.
All right, well, thank you so much. Let's see, we've got a lot of things coming in now. I'm trying to find someone who hasn't spoken much yet. Let's pull Rachel up. I don't think we've had Rachel on since the very beginning. There you go, Rachel.
Hi. I had written that we measure EL success by looking at the access scores each year. We also look at their EOC or EOG scores as well, just to see how they're doing with the content classes. And then just talking to the ELs personally and with their teachers, we do try to have a lot of collaboration between the ESL teacher and the teachers as well as the students. And we're a small school, so we have the opportunity to actually talk to the kids and see where they feel like they need help as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think I'm going to do one more and grab Cyrilda, because Cyrilda just had a monitoring visit. Oh. Hi. Can you hear me, Cyrilda? It looks like she's unmuted. Cyrilda? All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and read what Cyrilda has written, if I can find it again, because it moved. But basically, she said they just had a monitoring visit, And monitoring is done in a consolidated manner with all of the different titles. And she said that it opened up a great deal of discussion because they were talking about how working together actually benefits all of the programs, that the services being combined or people paying attention to each of the different groups. She works with the migrant population and the ELs, and how it has helped to bring sort of a fresh look to those populations and is opening up discussions, and then hopefully we'll be making some real positive impact as well. Did you see any others we want to unmute, or should we move on? Okay. So I'm going to turn it over to Anne Marie to talk about Chapter 6. If we didn't get to read your comments, I promise we will read them, and thank you so much for sharing.
Oh, and I do see one more comment about the graph from Chapter 5. One thing that people have talked about is taking materials from our book studies and discussions and using them as real educational tools or even posters, let's say, to share with stakeholders. And there's a person who said they might use that graph that way because it shows explicitly how content and language improvement happen in a sustainable way. And that's something that we need to keep in mind as we move into Chapter 6, especially because we're really talking about here not only enrichment programs and policy implications, but to a large degree, focusing in on our dual language immersion programs or DLI programs and the impact they can have on ELs. All right, so as we go into this, the first thing we have, of course, for our chapter is a poll question. And we want to know which of these terms can you explain to others in relation to English learner education. You can check all that apply. Some of these may be very familiar, some not so much, but which of these terms could you explain to others if you were put on the spot to do so? So I'll go ahead and launch our poll. You can check all that apply. All right, let's go ahead and finish up our voting. Remember that our poll questions are one of the things that we monitor when we grade for our synchronous sessions. All right, we'll close this out and then share our results. So as you can see, a good majority of people can certainly explain what ESL content programs are and DLI programs. Also, over half said they could talk about what transitional bilingual is and how that relates to EL education, along with additive and subtractive bilingualism. That additive and subtractive bilingualism are key terms when thinking about not only programming for ELs, but also thinking about explaining the benefits of dual language immersion. And just under half said they could also explain things like 90-10, 80-20, 50-50, which refers to the instructional time assigned to each language in a DLI program. So thank you for sharing that. On the next slide, we see some things we looked at in our connections component for this module. Dr. Thomas and Collier identified dual language immersion as a type of programming that is most effective for closing the achievement gap for ELs. And you see here pictured what you saw there, which is our DLI program flyers that are made up each year, so that when people say, well, hey, which districts have DLI programs, or which grade levels have DLI programs, or which languages are taught in DLI, there's sort of a quick answer to that. These documents, by the way, are updated every year, as I mentioned, and they're about to be updated again and shared later in November during one of our DLI quarterly update webinars. But for now, in thinking about what Thomas and Collier have said about DLI being the most effective type of programming to close achievement gap for ELs, how has North Carolina applied that research? And once again, I'll ask you to type in the question box and so that I know you're ready to be called on. I'm being asked to repeat the question. So the question is, how has North Carolina applied that research from Thomas and Collier that's mentioned here on this slide? How has we as a state applied that research? Gabriella has an answer for us, so I'll go ahead and unmute her.
Hi. Is it by creating more dual language programs?
Yes, in some ways it is. Now, as I just mentioned not too long ago, of course, North Carolina is a local control state. So the state itself, like our Department of Public Instruction here that Yvonne and I work for, we don't actually create any programs in the state. We don't make those decisions. We're a local control state. So it's up to our districts and schools to decide if a DLI program is right for them. What we do provide as a state and have made sure that we've had available is state standards to support DLI programs or any other program, by the way, that a district or school would decide to implement. And that comes across in things like, for example, for DLI programs, making sure that in our World Language Essential Standards that we have a whole K-12 sequence for DLI programs that refer to the development of the program language. Also, in our English language development standards, of course, we have attention paid to the English language proficiency of our English learners, whether they're in a DLI program or other places. And so those materials are all available on our DLI website for the state. I see a couple of people actually commenting that our state has provided funding for DLI programs in various districts across the state, and that actually is not true. North Carolina has never provided funding for DLI programs because there hasn't been any funding available. We do know some of our districts, as I mentioned before, are very creative in how they take the funding they've got, their state funding, and for teaching positions especially, and make sure that they allocate that in a way that they can support the establishment of a DLI program because it doesn't cost them anymore to do that. We've also had our districts and charter schools take funding like Title I funding, Title III funding, and other funding streams and redirect them to support a DLI program, for example, getting materials for the program or something like that. They occasionally do that, but there's no state funding like there is in some states. You may have heard about the state funding that comes along with Utah's DLI programs or Delaware's DLI programs, but realize that with that state funding also came some very strict guidelines about what types of DLI programs are allowable with that funding. And here in North Carolina, we have the freedom locally to determine which DLI programs are most appropriate for the schools and the communities that we serve. So, you know, whether it's a one-way program or a two-way program, which refers to the students being served, whether they're native speakers of one language or a mix of native speakers of two different languages, or the kind of instructional time that a school determines is right, those are all local decisions. And so we have a lot of liberty in North Carolina to establish a DLI program that's right for the school we're in.
We did have a question embedded in one of the comments wanting to know if North Carolina recognizes the seal of biliteracy.
Absolutely. We were one of the first states in the Southeast to have a state seal of biliteracy. Ours is called the Global Languages Endorsement, or GLE, simply because there are other diploma endorsements that our graduating seniors can earn. And so our seal of biliteracy was added to that list. It is automated in PowerSchool, which means that now when students are preparing for graduation, our PowerSchool system automatically checks to see how, if and how a student has qualified for the seal of biliteracy. And we do see students from DLI programs earn the seal of biliteracy quite often, but we also see students from other types of language programs earning the seal of biliteracy, including many of our English learners. One thing to note with our seal of biliteracy is that any language can be identified and can be earned on your seal of biliteracy. There are requirements for English proficiency, of course, as well as at least one other world language. And there are different options, and students can actually be recognized for multiple world languages. And so many times we are seeing students from DLI programs who earn the seal of biliteracy in their DLI program language, as well as a third language that they've learned. And that may be because they have a different home language, maybe because they've studied in their language. It just depends. So we do have a seal of biliteracy, and we've had it since 2015. I see Helen has a comment about how we're using the Thomas and Collier research in North Carolina. Helen, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you so you can share.
Hey, I just made a comment that now we have, I believe, 200 dual language immersion programs that different counties have implemented based on the research from Drs. Thomas and Collier.
You are correct. This year, according to our North Carolina DLI program directory that we update and maintain, we reached 200 programs, and that's also representing 47 of our 115 school districts with at least one DLI program. Some have multiple ones, as well as 7 charter schools and a handful of independent schools that are also included on our directory.
And one of the comments also talks about partnerships with IHEs. And that would be Joanna, if you want to unmute her.
I believe Joanna doesn't have a mic.
Okay.
But she says some schools have formed partnerships with our state universities to implement, support, and sustain DLI programs. And you're right, there's been a lot of work, for example, at UNC Charlotte. One of the things that UNC Charlotte offers is a business certificate in a variety of languages, including some in DLI program languages. And I know some of our districts that are located nearby to the Charlotte campus have actually sent their students on to that campus to continue learning in the language, even after they have taken courses, for example, at the high school level, like the heritage language courses we talked about, level 4 courses, and even AP courses or IB courses in the language. They can continue their study. In addition, several of our campuses have also partnered with our DLI programs to provide training for teachers and administrators. You may be familiar with East Carolina University, or ECU's, DLI Administration Certificate Program. That's an online program that in a 1 year and 4 courses provides administrators of DLI programs a broader perspective on DLI programs and their benefits to students. And we know a good deal of research is being done at various campuses, including, again, UNC Charlotte, about the impact of the seal of biliteracy on all students, but including students who have come from DLI programs or who are English learners or both. And they have also taken a close look at the professional development needs of teachers in DLI programs and how that might be addressed more effectively through some additional future supports, like, for example, an add-on to licensure for DLI instruction. So those things are coming along and certainly are opportunities to look forward to in the future. Okay, we're taking a look at different comments. It seems like people have a lot to share, which is nice. Give us just a second to kind of scroll through. Louisa has commented several things about this. So Louisa, I'm going to unmute you.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, the only thing I had commented about the other discussions. For this one, I just said that by building capacity, because they are trying to respond to the demand now. So they have to make sure the teachers are trained and administrators are trained now to respond to the new demands. That's it.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. You know, building capacity across the state is so critical when it comes to programs like DLI. We have worked hard as a state to build capacity and networking capabilities. We've made sure that, for example, our DLI educators have a professional home with the Foreign Language Association of North Carolina, or FLANC, so that there are sessions specifically designed for them at the annual FLANC Fall Conference, as well as the FLANC Spring Conference that includes our North Carolina DLI seminar for administrators and teachers. We also have a number of things on the website, some of them that have been created in support of our standards as we're implementing DLI, and others that have been created by our districts and schools that are doing DLI and shared back with us so that everyone could benefit from that. So there's a lot to do when we think about building capacity.
And in addition to that, the EL support team has offered some modules as well as some face-to-face training on DLI with Dr. Joan Lachance from UNC Charlotte. So some of you may have participated in that as well.
And I see Cyrilda making actually a series of comments about how some of the tools and the supports that we've built and are sharing through the website and through different things like even this class gives people tools to take back to administrators and educate them on the benefits of, for example, DLI for students, especially English learners. There's also classes and different things that can be used to educate other stakeholders like community members and parents. And so those are all important things to have. Some of it actually grew out of, too, the Global Education Task Force report that we were implementing as a state between 2013 and 2018. So we had 5 years to put some things in place that would really support some of the work we're doing with DLI. And that work now continues and actually is growing in a variety of ways, including things like our Seal of Biliteracy that we talked about before. All right, well, let's move on. We have a couple of questions here on the next slide that really think about our English learners and how they fare in different types of programs. And so the question is, does submersion of English learners in the English mainstream work better than other programs? And you might want to refer to what the author shared in our book on page 77 or share what you have experienced. All right, looks like we're getting some responses. Helen, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you so you can share.
Okay. I think that I don't think it works better than other programs, especially after reading the research from Thomas and Collier that advocate for dual language immersion. I do think that it might work, but the mainstream teacher has to be knowledgeable and has to be committed to growing ELs. And unfortunately, that is very hard to find. I don't think it is common for mainstream teachers to be well trained in working with ELs, and that's an area that I think colleges and universities that prepare teachers should take into account when they design their programs.
Yeah, that's a good point. And when we talk about designing programs, that higher education level where we prepare teachers is just as important as any other component of our programs and how we evaluate them. Liz, I see that you have a response to this. I'm going to unmute you. Elizabeth Shinohara, go ahead. Oh, she doesn't seem to have a working mic right now. That's okay. Catherine, I'll go ahead and unmute you to share what you have put in the question box.
I agree with what the previous speaker said. It seems to be rare to find classroom teachers today who are fully prepared in the whole range of what we read about the full PRISM model. They usually might be prepared in maybe one of the areas, but not necessarily all components. And for that reason, I think that full submersion without ESL support, either directly with the student or indirectly with the teacher, I don't think it is sufficient until our teacher ed programs have fully implemented EL training for all teacher certifications.
Okay. Rachel also has some comments on that, so I will unmute her.
Hi, I had just said that as far as doing English only, oftentimes, especially if the student's a newcomer, they end up feeling overwhelmed at first by learning a whole new language and the new content with no first language support. And like we have been reading, Thomas and Collier's research says that students who are in English only or English intensive or even transitional bilingual programs, they only make 7 to 8 months progress kind of at the most each year instead of the 10 months progress that native English speakers make. And so you end up with that gap that just keeps widening even as the students get into high school.
All right. Cyrilda, I see you have a comment to share. Please go ahead. Okay, her mic may not be working. Sandra, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Sandra Brighton. By the way, I see we have a couple Sandras on the line. Sandra Brighton, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Go ahead, yes. Go ahead, Sandra, we can hear you.
Maybe she can't hear us.
So while she's fixing those tech problems, I'm going to move along to Emily Long. She has something to share from a parent perspective that's kind of interesting when we talk about submersion. So Emily, go ahead.
So my daughter was at UNC Greensboro in college, and she had to take a Spanish class, and she was placed in a submersion Spanish, and it got extremely frustrated, and she just eventually gave up and was like, I can't do this. So it really shows how, I mean, it works both ways, and I saw how frustrated she was, so I can see how frustrated my students are when they are like looking at you and you're speaking English and they're like, what? So, I mean, firsthand, I've seen exactly what it does to someone that is placed in a classroom and they do not understand what the teacher's saying, what they're asking them to do. So it's rough.
Yeah, it can be a tough way to go. There's several people commenting that sometimes if that's all you've got, that's what you do and you try to make the best of it. And I know we probably all experience that to some degree, either for ourselves or for our students.
And Anna points out that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, that what works for one may not work for another.
Amen.
All right.
I saw several questions about licensure. Is there actually certification or licensure for ESL teachers? And yes, there is a specific licensure that can be acquired for an ESL teacher. And in North Carolina, if you have licensure in any subject, you can then take the praxis in order to be able to add on licensure in another subject. So if you have a passion for ELs, we do encourage coursework to make sure that you truly understand the ins and outs of working with English learners, but you can take and pass the praxis in order to add on that ESL licensure. In some states, as you know, all teachers have to have some sort of EL license or EL certification in order to teach. North Carolina is not a state that includes that, but as some of you mentioned earlier, one of the things to think about with our IHEs as they're preparing our teachers, is that something that at some point will actually be added? And we don't have that answer, but thank you for bringing that up.
All right, let's take one more comment from Louisa, who has a different feeling about this question after reading the chapter. So I'm unmuting Louisa. Go ahead. Oh, there's tech problems. But what has been said here is that her hypothesis was that younger learners would be okay with submersion.
Oh my God, can you hear me now?
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, it was me. Okay, so before reading the chapter, my hypothesis was that younger learners who had never received any schooling in either language would be actually okay with submersion. But after I read the chapter, I was like, wait a minute, so it doesn't work like that. Because I think with older learners, I have always thought, well, they have the right to support their second language acquisition without being ashamed of using their native language. And we all know that those learning strategies you activate in your native language can be transferred and used in your second language acquisition. But I thought younger learners would be okay because they had never received any schooling. And actually with the chapter, you know how they said, well, at first, like the first test they took, they were okay, but then you could see that gap. So my hypothesis was proved wrong.
Well, that's always one of the benefits of doing a little bit more reading and discussing like we're doing here. What does the research really show? What have everyone's experiences been? And that's why it's good to discuss things like this. All right, well, let's move along. There are a lot of sort of specific things in chapter 6 and chapter 5 as well that we want to focus in on. In chapter 6 on page 79, the authors recommend that parents who refuse bilingual or ESL services for their children be informed that their children's long-term academic achievement will probably be much lower as a result. What evidence do the authors provide for this statement that you find very compelling? And what evidence have you seen in your own experience? Don't be shy. Go ahead and type some ideas into the questions box that you want to share, and then we'll unmute you. I'm going to go ahead and unmute Helen to share kind of an interesting perspective of what's happened in her school. Go ahead.
Hi, I think I shared this in previous synchronous sessions that I actually had to deal with a staff member who was discouraging parents from accepting ESL services because, in her opinion, the child was fluent enough to function well in the mainstream class. And it was a little bit of a struggle to get her to understand that a child could be fluent in social language, but that didn't assure that the child was going to be successful academically, when academic language was involved. So that, I think, it's part of the role of the ESL teacher as well, educating the staff so that they know that these are things that not necessarily go together. A child can be very fluent, in a very informal setting, but when it has to do with content learning and academic language, that's where ESL services really support them.
Yeah, it's a good point about educating staff, educating our colleagues about this research and what it says for the long-term achievement of students. Joanna said that she's never known parents that have refused bilingual ESL services for their children, and she wonders how often that actually happens. It is interesting because I don't know that we have an analysis of how often it happens necessarily. We have some anecdotal evidence. We also have issues with parents of a DLI program language not wanting to enroll their children in the DLI program because there's some concern somehow that they won't learn English. And so there are different types of challenges with working with parents and helping them understand how being bilingual and biliterate can benefit students not only in the short term, but of course in the long run. Veronique has a comment to share. I'll go ahead and unmute her so she can speak out. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, so of course there's the case of those almost 1,600 students in Houston, and that's really a great example, I think, that we can use to try to convince the parents that as parents, we often think that we know what's the best for our children, and we don't necessarily always know what's best because we don't have the research and the knowledge in depth and the scientific knowledge for everything. And of course, this is a great example. And it's something that just crossed my mind also, especially because of the current social context and political and everything together. I also think that sometimes maybe some parents, especially of the Hispanic heritage, may be afraid that if their children are on some kind of a list, that they can be sort of in danger of being, expelled of the country. I think this is unfortunately a reality right now. So that might also be a reason they may not want their children to be, put in some sort of a list as Hispanics. But the research here and what comes out of this example in Texas is definitely, kind of going back and forth with different ideas here, but I think the research really is a good way to try to convince the parents if we really strictly focus on convincing them of what is really good in the long term for their children.
Yeah, and there's several people saying they agree with you that sharing research like that with parents is important. And Anna even says, the authors of this book provide research findings from many studies indicating that bilingual and ESL services raise students' achievement levels by significant amounts. And probably in ways that we can easily share them. We pointed out a couple of charts and graphs and the graph, as we know from chapter 5, but also there's some great summaries of these very comprehensive studies that could be shared pretty easily. So that's a help to us as educators.
Yeah.
All right. I'm looking for different responses. I got a lot of agreement going on right now in our questions box.
I saw a great one that says, research has shown that being bilingual, the future is better. That's Giovanna. I don't know if you want to expand on that. Let me jump in and just pull out. That was such a positive response. Giovanna, did you want to share anything else about that?
Well, yeah, I was reading in the book, you know, how they have done research in several
You're
schools.
very, Giovanna, I'm sorry to interrupt you. It's very, very metallic. It's really hard to understand you. If you've got something else electronic beside you or something, maybe step away. Try one more time. No.
No, I don't know. My computer is acting weird. I don't know. I'm sorry.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and mute you. Thank you if you want to type more, but that was a wonderful statement, so I just had to jump in and share that.
All right. Well, as we continue on, I think we have to keep in mind all that we've learned in chapters 5 and 6 and also the previous chapters. But what other questions or thoughts about chapter 6 or module 8 content would you like to share with the group today? And keep in mind, especially those of you who are in the 1 CEU section, sometimes in the 2 CEU section of our course on the Canvas side, of course, people are sharing different things in discussion forums that are sort of an extension of this. But this is an opportunity for you to share with everyone because we don't always get to see each other's postings and so forth in Canvas. I see Jesus has something to share. Jesus, I'm unmuting you. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm just trying to find where I wrote. Well, it's just a comment about explaining the slide before that it seems like submersion in the English mainstream is geared toward the concept of the melting pot, where you become one of us by losing your roots, versus the dual language that is geared to the concept of the salad bowl. While you're part of us, you're preserving your culture, and you learn who we are. And another comment that I made is that usually parents that feel that children need English only do it because of fear, and the child will lose the opportunity to grow as everybody else. And we also have to consider that we got the first generation, the ones that come here for the first time, they are very willing, and they want the child to take as many opportunities as they can. But the second generation, third generation, especially third generation of children that are born here, those parents might feel that English only is the way, and they are more, they don't want to identify themselves as part of that lost culture. By that time, they have lost a lot of their culture, and they feel like their children should be more uh, in the English only way of thinking.
Yeah, it really gives us a lot to consider. Rhonda has a comment to share as well. Rhonda, I'm unmuting you.
I just wanted to comment. Being a veteran teacher, I started in EC, and back during that time, parents wanted their EC children to be placed into a mainstream classroom as opposed to being in a contained environment. And it kind of backfired on us as educators as well as the parent, because the students were totally ill prepared to be immersed into that environment. And I think that's what we're looking at with our EL learners.
That's a really good point. It gives us pause when we think about how we talk to parents about the services that are available to their children, whether it's ESL services or EC services or any others. Sandra Lopez has a comment. I'm going to unmute her. Sandra, go ahead.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so this is just a comment that I have in regards with parents refusing services for their children. After 10 years or 11 years of being in the classroom, I realized that I needed to go deeper in understanding the real cause for one or two parents to refuse EL services. And then I became to understand that the achievement concept was culturally misunderstood. And I'm just gonna give you an example. I remember having a student in 5th grade, and when I asked the mom why she didn't want to have more EL services for her kid, she said that back in her country, students normally graduate when they are in 5th grade, and that was the end of their school life. So I will suggest that we have to be a little bit more careful, especially when we just take the decision without go deeper into the cause for that, because it seems like there's a cultural component behind the fact.
Yeah, there can definitely be cultural components to work with, as well as expectations and maybe even a misunderstanding of what resources are available. You know, when you have someone who comes from an environment or maybe formal education or universal, for example, secondary education wasn't necessarily available, they may not know that that's an expectation here in the United States. And that's, again, something we can educate on. And we've got several people agreeing with Sandra that, you know, we have to educate parents about our school systems and what they have. Okay, well, I'm noticing our time, and I don't want us to go too much over. We've got a lot of great comments and a lot of people saying that this discussion has reminded them of some things that they've experienced and some things that they will think about going forward, really about making sure that everyone is aware of the research and the impact of different types of language programs on our English learners as they look long-term at achievement and success in their futures. All right, well, let's go to our wrap-up question. What next steps will you take based on the chapter or modules that we've talked about today? You have several options there, and I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll question so you can share with us what you're thinking for today. All right, let's finish out our voting. All right, I'll go ahead and close this out and share the responses. It looks like literally everyone, 100% of you said, as a result of our discussion today, you will initiate discussion among colleagues. It's always a good place to start. Other educators you know are eager, we hope, to learn about research and things like that, and certainly eager to understand how to better help their students, whoever those students are, whether they're students who are placed in their classes from time to time, or whether they're students that they see every day. We also have a majority of you saying you'll dig deeper into the chapter and the modules that we've read, and that you'll advocate for changes. So that's always good too. We even have a few people saying they'll analyze the data and even legislation a little more closely to see what they can do for next steps. All right, well, thank you for that. We'll wrap up today by just reminding you that we are grading the synchronous sessions, as you know, for both the 1 CEU section and 2 CEU section of our course. Attendance in the synchronous sessions is part of our grades, including the poll questions and the discussion participation. And then for our 2 CEU section, they also have reflection questions as well as chapter quizzes, reading quizzes to do as they earn that extra contact hour, extra CEU or 10 contact hours. In addition, this is our first book study. You see it labeled book study number 1 in our whole Thomas & Collier book study series. Eventually, we will have a book study like this for all 5 of the books you see here, and those will start with an instructor-led course like we're doing right now. And then once that is done, we take that course and create a self-paced course that we make available through our statewide system in Canvas so that you can work with that in different ways. And that's it for today. We want to remind everyone that they need to do Module 9 for next week. Module 9 actually includes both chapters 7 and 8 combined. So everyone needs to do the readings. There's only one quiz for chapters 7 and 8 combined, and there's several discussion forums. So make sure you get all that done before our next synchronous session next Tuesday, November 12th, from 4 to 5:30 p.m. Keep in mind that will be our last synchronous session together, but we will continue to do some postings and even have a feedback survey for you to finish out the course online in our Canvas course. So we're signing off for today. As you know, I'm Anne-Marie Gunter, the World Languages Consultant here, and I'm with my colleague Ivana Manthrower-Anderson, one of my ESL Title III consultants that we have. So you're welcome to contact us at any time. I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording.